said, I'm a professor. There will be a test. Seriously, why I'm here is we've just launched a new book. It's called Practical Innovation in Government. The real important thing is the subtitle. It's called How Frontline Leaders Are Transforming Public Sector Organizations. Frontline leaders. Okay. What it's done is it's based on a bit of research. A little bit of background on me before I get started. I like to say I started out in life as an industrial engineer and have been involved in continuous improvement ever since. So that's more than a few decades. As a matter of fact, it's quite a few more than a few decades. But the fun thing that I've been able to witness is I was able to watch the current continuous improvement movement from the beginning. From the beginning. My partner and I were over in Japan in the 80s, and we even went back further than that. I went back further than that. I used to run plants. I used to do turnarounds, startups, consolidations, organizational transformations, where I actually used a lot of the principles we still are working on today. And one of the things that happened on this is we had a question. This started after we launched our last book. The question we came up with, or that came to us, was can we just, in government, can we just borrow from the private sector? Or is there something about CIA and government that is different? Why did we come up with this? Well, what happened is we had just launched our previous book, The Idea-Driven Organization, in 2014. And we started getting calls from government managers asking us for support, asking us for questions. In one case, they created a page straight out of our book, put it on their website. This is 14, okay? 8 years ago. And we're looking at this and saying, well, this is great. We have worked with government in the past. But you know, one of the things we found in working with government, some of the things that worked smoothly in industry just didn't seem to get the traction they should have in government. Just didn't seem to work right. And so when we start getting these calls for help, we think, well, wait a minute. We don't just want to take what we learned over 30 years in the private sector and put it into government, and if it doesn't work, say government just doesn't get it. Well, that's not the way to go. As a matter of fact, it's stupid. So we decided to find out what's different. We're academics. What's the first thing we do? Go to the literature. Guess what? Nothing. Nothing in the literature. So we decided to kick a few tires, find some operations and go in and look at it. We're field people. We love to get in the field to do our research. We don't send questionnaires. We don't crunch a lot of data. We get out there and look and test. So we started looking for places, government organizations that were doing well. And we said, pretty soon, hey, there's enough here, maybe we can get an article out of it. You know, you've heard publish or perish, right? So you get in a habit of that, even though you're not going to perish anymore as a senior faculty member. Tenured full professor, endowed chair, who's going to mess with you? But the point is, you still want to put up the articles so you can put pressure on the junior people. But that's a different story. So we thought maybe we can get an article out of this. All right? We kept going, and we said, hey, wait a minute, there's something here. Maybe we can get a short book, a monograph, 80 pages. Short books are popular now, right? In, quick, out, on an airplane. Kept going, kept finding more. By the time we were through, it was quite different. We didn't set out to write this book. It's been out 6 weeks. But what we ended up doing is a 6-year study. From 2014 to 2020 was the data gathering. And what happened in 2020 that we stopped data gathering? We all know. COVID. So we switched to our writing and the publishing phase, and that was delayed because of COVID too. But we had 6 years, grounded theory research approach. Okay, what a grounded theory research method is rather than forming a hypothesis and going out and testing it, You go out and kick the tires. You look at what's really going on. You study it. You take a deep dive into the organization. You talk to people on the front line. You talk to people that are running the place. You talk to the governor. You talk to the janitor. You just look at everything. And you make some hypotheses from that. And then you go to the next place and test those hypotheses while you're doing the same thing. And pretty soon, you're repeating this over different environments, different settings, and getting at what really works, what really doesn't work, and most important to me, why doesn't it work and why does it work? The why. Love the why. My two favorite questions for my students, my favorite answer for students is, it depends. My favorite question is why. Drives them nuts. Anyways, 77 units we studied in depth. Got on a plane, went there. 5 different countries, ranging, by the way, from small departments to entire states. Got a couple of cities in there that are doing well. 5 different countries, US, Canada, UK, Sweden, Denmark. And over 1,000 interviews, okay? So it's a broad-based study. Now, what I'm going to present today is cut back. I've got about 4 or 5 core principles I want to share, or things that we found that some might surprise you, some won't. Some will surprise you but not surprise you at the same time, I suspect. And some might be controversial and really make you, I hope you listen to them and say, okay, how's this play out in my organization? How's this playing out from us? Is it real? Can I believe it? We have had wonderful speakers. And I keep going through this and say, yeah, that link's here, that link's there, and it's all nesting together. And so what you're hearing and what you want to take away is, what are the patterns you're hearing in the messages? Because that's what's the important message. But that'll take about a half of my time. The other half of the time, I want you to ask any questions you have that I might have an answer to from the study. And guess what? There's enough smart people in this room that they might have an answer if I don't, or an answer in addition to mine. So what I'd like to do is take my roughly hour and divide it in half. And you get half, I get half. Okay? So what that means is, be prepared to ask questions. And guess what? The tougher the better. I love tough questions. We might not have answers to them, but we might have some input to them, some ideas. All right. You up for that? Okay, got to keep you awake after lunch, right? Okay, what did we learn? Not surprisingly, this is the not surprising question. We learned that some approaches to CI, some methods, some tools, some stuff really works well in government too. How many of the things we've talked about are coming out of industry? Most of them, or a lot of them, okay? But here's what we also learned. Some approaches need to be modified, and some approaches don't work well at all. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the approaches that don't work as well in the public sector as they do in the private sector. And we're using a broad brush. I'm not getting down to the specifics. I'm staying at sort of a generic level. And by the way, just something I forgot to mention. Because we started in 14 and ended in 20, some of the people in this room, which might have made the cut and drawn our attention for this study, if we'd run it later, didn't get a chance to be in. But I can tell you, for example, Arizona, when we first started our study, we looked at Arizona. There was some talk and some, a little bit going on, but not enough to get us down there. By the time we finished our study, we were down in Arizona. So Tennessee, Missouri, sorry we didn't have you in the study, but you guys were just getting started then. So just to give you a little. The interesting thing we saw some approaches being very effective in government that are rarely used in industry. And even some where government was leading the way. It's kind of fun. It's fun to come out and see government leading the way in private industry. I've given a talk, my most popular talk that I've given the most is what business can learn from the public sector when it comes to continuous improvement. That's been my most often given talk. First finding, let's look at some of these findings. Here's one that might be controversial. Okay, you tell me. Improvement efforts driven by management and professional staff are more challenging in government than they are in business. Do you buy that? Do you buy that? You want to disagree with it? I think you've all lived it, right? You know what a rapid improvement event, let's see, it was a Kaizen Blitz or a Kaizen event or a rapid improvement event. You know what that is? How many people know what that is? Okay, by its name, you can guess. It's a process that is designed to be done very quickly. It comes out of Toyota and is essentially in between 2 and 5 days of intense work of getting the right people there. You change a process. Okay? A week of pre-work, week or so of pre-work, setting everything up, some post-work to make sure it's implemented, but most of the activity of the Kaizen team are right there. We studied one continuous rapid improvement event that took 9 months in government. We studied another one that took 18 months. All right? How rapid is that? How rapid is that? Now, let me ask you this. See if I can get some input from you. Why? Remember my favorite question to my students? Why is this true if it is true? It depends. Oh, talking about playing it back to the professor. I love it. What does it depend on? But no, why did we find that it's more difficult to do management and professional staff-driven improvement in government? I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying it's more difficult. Why? The objectives are different?
In terms of monetary incentives.
The incentives are different? The mission is different? What else? The knowledge is different? What else? The legislature. You got government. You've got special interests. You got more stakeholders. You've got a whole lot of things. You've got government has a different role to play. It's got unique checks and balances. What do we call checks and balances? Oftentimes we call it bureaucracy. But is it there for a reason? The answer is yeah. It's to assure ethics, to assure fairness, to assure a lot of other things. Does it get in the way? You bet. But it's there. As to diverse consistency, the nature of leadership. How's leadership different? How's leadership different in government? Some people are in their positions just because they've outlasted how many administrations? Okay, what else? There's not the expertise? Specifically, where's there not the expertise? In leadership, right? We had one very interesting conversation with the city manager of Uras, Sweden, community in Sweden that was doing a very good job on their continuous improvement. And he said, democracy is one of the few one of the few political approaches where the people in charge know far less than the people that are doing the work. Because they rotate out. They rotate out. And when they rotate out, the top levels of a lot of your departments, and maybe even several levels deeper, all depends, all of a sudden change. And who gets put in those people, or those positions? Who gets put in those positions? Hopefully people that are competent, but also people that are very loyal and that have supported the campaign. That's the way the system works. So, measurement of performance is very much more varied and indistinguishable. If you don't deliver in business, you're out of there. or you should be.
I also think sometimes the scope is too large, what we're trying to solve for. And sometimes people throw their hands up, like if we can't change a statute or a rule or regulation, it's gonna take too long. If we don't narrow the scope down to what we can actually solve for, then we languish.
I don't know if you all caught that, but she said, our scope is too large. We try to take on too much at once. And we focus on too broad an area instead of something that we actually can get done. And you're going to love my next slide. You're going to love my next slide, which is the second big finding, next big finding. Finding number 2, frontline managers and employees were the ones driving most of the operational improvement in the high-performing organizations we studied. Frontline people. Frontline people. The hero of our story is that frontline supervisor. Frontline supervisor is really the hero of the story because that's where the rubber meets the road. There's a number of things involved in this, but let's look at one of the stories, one of my favorite stories. And this is the Denver Department of Excise and Licensing. What happened is Stacy Laux was appointed by Mayor Hancock to run the Department of Excise and Licensing. These guys issue somewhere between 80 and 90 different types of licenses, everything from security guard to liquor licenses to 7 different marijuana licenses to, you name it, all the different business licenses. And Stacy walks in the department, and it's 85 degrees. It's 85 degrees. The air conditioner can't get it below 85 degrees. Why? There are so many people waiting in line for their licenses, there's just body heat. Can't keep the air conditioner, just can't keep up. All the frontline staff that are servicing them, the service technicians, are busily working on it, and there's all these people mulling around. Real problem, real problem. So what she does is she pulls in Melissa Fields, now Melissa Wiley, from Peak Academy. Brian Elms, who was running Peak Academy, seconded Melissa to them and to figure out the mess. You got to find out the mess, what's causing this. And she put together some numbers, and they found that the average wait time was 1 hour and 40 minutes with peaks of 7 hours. And all of a sudden, can you imagine 7 hours to renew an annual license? All right, and they sent the front line off to training, to what would be about equivalent to the white belt training we talked about. Not a whole lot of training, a good solid day. And the managers got 5 days. And they came back, turned them loose, but there was a requirement. Guess what? At the end of the year is 3 months away, and every employee had to have one idea to improve that they could implement themselves, or with very little support. All right. So what happened is they got down to 7 minutes. I was in there on Wednesday, made a visit on Wednesday. It was a ghost town, a ghost office. There was hardly anyone there. Because once they freed up the people's time, the staff's time, they could start focusing on how can we do this better as a process? How can we put this online? How can we, what licenses really do we need? For example, they were looking at adding a license for rideshare workers. You know, rideshare drivers, I got to license them. The cab drivers were complaining because they were licensed and the rideshare people weren't. So what was the solution they came up with? Did they license ridesharers? No, they actually unlicensed cab drivers. Made it much easier to get both positions. So, but they didn't have the time to do that because they were treading water, trying to stay up on the day-to-day. And now that we've got that out of the way, they got down there. How did they do it? Predominantly through small ideas from frontline employees. Small ideas. Think about this. We're trying to fix a whole process. We're having all kinds of problems with that because of resistance, different people, different constituents, trying to get it fixed. It's taken us a long time. They're talking about small ideas, things that can just be done. Why? Why was that? Small ideas. Really, can we transform an organization with small ideas? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Sounds ridiculous. Let's take a closer look. Small ideas might be tiny, but they can pack a heck of a wallop. Let's look at one. This goes back to Denver again, excise and license. The problem in the service department. One of the things they had is they had a computer and printer set up in the waiting area where people could do their own background checks. You need criminal background checks for things like liquor licenses, for security guard licenses, for marijuana licenses, for a lot of things. So they had this all set up, and people would go there and fill out their own background checks and print them out. So they'd add that to their package when they handed it in. Problem was the software was not user-friendly. So what you had is you had 36 times a day people being interrupted, the service techs being interrupted. Each time is about 5 minutes to go out there, show them how to do it and stuff like that. And they came up with an idea. Let's make our own manual. Let's take screenshots with arrows and instructions and just lay it out there. So a couple of the frontline staffers made this, they put it up there. The problem disappeared because you could walk through it. So 5 minutes, save 5 minutes. Is that a big idea? How much did it cost to put in? A little bit of time, that's it. Not even too much time. Big idea, little idea. Little idea, little idea, easy to implement. What would have been done if it didn't work? Change it. Change it. It was done at the frontline level. The manager knew about it, said, go for it. But they did it themselves. So what you have is you have 5 minutes, 36 interruptions a day. That turns out to be 750 hours per year. 750 hours per year. What does that make it? Well, you do the math. On Wednesday, I was giving a presentation to the Colorado Department of Public Safety, and the executive that was in the room looked at that, and he said, that's a $100,000 idea. What does it cost what does an employee fully loaded, fully costed cost? And that's one idea one employee every 3 years. So that's a $100,000 idea. A little idea packs a big wallop. Another one, guys from Arizona will recognize this one. Another one. This is to show that there's a lot of these small ideas that are possible. First is there's 12 ideas implemented per year at the 51st Avenue Motor Vehicle Service Center when I was there. The Motor Vehicle Service Center at the time was one of the worst performing in the units in the state, in the motor vehicle division. People would show up with their dogs, their grandparents that they were taking care of, their kids. They'd show up with personal devices to watch movies on, boom boxes, you name it, because the wait was so long. The place was a jammed mess, total chaos. So as part of the implementation of the Arizona management system, they had a way, they came up with a tack they called mile wide, mile deep. Mile wide is they started training people from the top and roll that down. Mile deep was each department had assignment of going into 2 units and trying to fix them using continuous improvement. And they picked a tough one. So they put together a team of experts, of people from other motor vehicle departments, branches, put them together, and they started working on it. And they couldn't really break through. They made it a little bit better, but not a whole lot better, until one day the queuing system went down. Boom. Blew up, didn't work. So the team that was the improvement team happened to be meeting that day at the site, and so they say, oh my gosh, this must be a terrible mess. They go out and look at it. Calm and organized. More calm and organized than it usually does in the queuing system. Well, the queuing system went to 50 and then started again, and you would have situations where they'd call a number and 3 different people would come up because they had to look at the timestamp to see which one. Think of how you felt when oh, my number's called, great. No, you're 2 more rounds away. You're 100 people away yet. But anyways, what happened is the frontline workers reorganized everything. They'd done this before. They reorganized it, got everyone in lines, everything moving, and the net result was they could process people faster for a whole lot of reasons. And that was the epiphany moment for members of the team. They said, we got to include the frontline folks more. We got to listen to them. So they set up their huddle boards, which wasn't coming online quite yet, but they accelerated the use of the huddle boards, the frontline huddle boards. And when we were there, the team we were talking to was averaging 12 ideas per person per year, one a month improvement, each one of them. That's a lot of those small ideas that save only $100,000 a year. But the net result was they got the lines way down. The goal was to make it so that somebody could leave work, drive there, get serviced, drive back 15 minutes, 1 hour total trip. So in other words, a half an hour service. And they got it down for 75% were being served within 15 minutes. Okay, small ideas. We don't normally think of small ideas as that powerful, but our research has shown that 80% of any organization's potential, not actual. Yeah,
So I want to go back a slide. Can I go back a slide?
of course.
Okay, so you implemented this idea, which 73 minutes up to 3 hours, and now it's 15 minutes.
Yeah,
What did you do to get it to that?
we didn't do anything.
I know, but
The frontline workers did.
what did they do?
Okay, let's take an example. Let's take one little idea. One little idea, okay? Now you got this big crowd of folks, right? Waiting for the number to be called. All right, number gets called. People have been waiting there for 3 hours, right? Do they hear their number being called, or are they on their headphones watching their medium? Or have they given up and gone back to work? And so there's this downtime. And even if the person jumps up right away, gets in line, walks up there, it takes 2 to 3 minutes. So all of a sudden, you've got somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes downtime, average, just to get somebody up to be served. Okay, what is that? That's waste. That's waste. Now you cut those times down to 30 seconds or less, and all of a sudden, that creates a whole lot of improvement for some little ideas that change the system. That's an example of one of the things. I don't have I can't think of the other ones would take too long to explain, but a lot of them are very, very simple, just do it answers. For example, if we want to go back one more, we talked about one idea here, but another idea was a fellow by the name of Leo. Each packet for a license came up with somewhere between 5 and 8 separate sheets. And you'd go to the pigeonholes and you'd take different sheets because they're used the same. A very high percentage, turns out 40% of the people that got to the front of the line didn't have the right package. All right, so one day, guy for security guard license comes up, hands Leo this nice organized packet of papers. And Leo says, hey, nice job in organizing this. The guy laughed. He says, no, that's the way my boss gave it to me. I just filled it out. Now, is it a big jump for Leo to say, hey, we should prepackage these according to license instead of according to form? Now, how much time did that save? All these little things that the people on the front lines can come up with. That's how these things happen. 80% potential. Now, I might be aging myself. Rodney Dangerfield, how many of you know Rodney Dangerfield? Good. Don't get no respect. Well, small ideas don't get any respect. Why don't they get respect? Why don't small ideas from front lines get respect? If they're so powerful, if 80% of your improvement potential actually lies there, why don't they get more respect?
A lot of times we don't hear about it.
You don't hear about them. Management doesn't hear about them. They never make it out of the department. As a matter of fact, let's take Leo's idea. What happened to that? It just disappeared into the daily operations. Nobody knows it. The customer doesn't know that was done, unless they've been through it before and they say, oh, that's a nice improvement. But it just disappears into the daily operations. So anyone from outside of the department, if you're coming in from outside of the department, what do you see? You see a well-run department. You don't see all of those ideas. It's not as glamorous as, oh, we got a process change, we put in this new technology, we got a whole new queuing system. You don't see it. You see those things, but you don't see those small ideas. So they don't get any respect. But they are powerful. Third finding that I want to share. You need a spectrum of improvement methods because you got a full spectrum of problems. You got all kinds of different problems. So if you're focusing on just a handful of things like, say, we do Lean Six Sigma and rapid improvement events. Okay, you're missing, how do you do a rapid improvement event or a Lean Six Sigma or an A3 or whatever it is, just a single thing, for some of those ideas we talked about, some of the small ideas? The answer is, you don't. What do? You just do them. You just collect them at the ground level, you discuss them at the frontline level, and you just do them. And yet you do need processes to handle some of the higher level things. What we found actually among the organizations is we found sort of three different levels. These levels were the approaches to handle large numbers of small ideas quickly and efficiently. You know, huddle board process, a daily or weekly huddle works fine. Anyone can, these slides are available to anyone who just clicks on the QR code to begin with. Secondly, there's the mid-sized problems. These are the Six Sigmas, these are the rapid improvement events, these are A3s. These are your processes where essentially if you get the right people in the room with a little bit of time and a little bit of resources, you can solve them. Now in governments, like we said, it's a little more complicated than it would be in private industry, but that's what we're talking at that level. And lastly, we have what we call the systems level issues. These are the big cross-cutting things. You might start with a value stream chart that cuts across several industries. One of our favorites was the British Library. The British Library had a room about this size where two complete walls traced the process for pulling documents and artifacts from their collection for a customer. It was huge. And they've been working on it, clicking away at this problem, that problem, for a couple of years. It was kind of fun to watch, but you're looking at that and saying, wow. Second largest library in the world. You know, have just not only print copy, but all kinds of other stuff too. But what you're talking about there is a campaign. You're talking about more of a campaign. It's not just a problem you focus on. It's a cluster of problems underneath it, and you need all the methods to get to the bottom of it. All right? Now, one of our favorite examples of this was actually our friends up in New Brunswick. New Brunswick, by the way, probably has the most mature, sophisticated continuous improvement system of any state/province we've ever visited. It's amazing. It's amazing. They've survived 4 regime changes. That's another thing for some of you guys that are concerned about regime change. Jane Washburn has been brilliant on how she's changed regimes. Now, she actually has 6 different levels. Starting at the bottom, daily management. Think of that as almost your daily huddle system at the frontline level. How did we do yesterday? This is what we're going to do. What are the problems we're facing? What are the solutions for it? Right there every day. We have waste walks, which are basically frontline folks looking at a process, going through it, trying to find out how to improve it. Sometimes they're physical walks. Sometimes they're through a process. But right at the front line. Then we got rapid improvement events. We got Lean Six Sigma. We got value stream mapping. And then at the top we have deliverology. How many of you have heard of deliverology? Drew? Yep. And who did Michael Barber work for?
Tony Blair.
Tony Blair. Tony Blair made these outlandish, huge promises in his second campaign, and then he wins and he says, oh my gosh, I got to figure out how to follow through on that. So in a very top-down fashion, Barbara works for him, develops the Office of Deliverology, I think it was. The delivery unit, there you go. All right, and they developed this method called Deliverology, and it was very top-down, but there was enough effort and concentration, and it made some real differences in education and healthcare, I believe, were two of the areas that...
And also, I think, public safety.
Public safety, that was the third one. But guess what happened after Blair was out of office? Bye-bye to Deliverology. Now, here's one of the brilliant things about why Deliverology is on this list. I'm not putting it there because it's actually useful. I'm putting it there because it's one of the formal parts of the formal management system, which is the title for their continuous improvement system, but it's linked to strategy. What they're dealing with there is a new prime minister comes in and is in love with Deliverology. Read the book. Fan of Tony's. Well, so was the prime minister of all of Canada. And so Deliverology all of a sudden became the thing. So here's Jane looking at this and saying, my whole system is going to be replaced by Deliverology. Oh my. I probably shouldn't say this. I called her once. She was just a mess. She was just really concerned about this. I called her 6 months later. Oh, she's back to herself. I said, what happened to that? She says, I just convinced them to put Deliverology on the top of my list that was already there. And so now I cover that out of my office of strategy management as well as the others. And so that was part of the give and take of the transfer to a new regime. She's one of the most astute middle managers in terms of I've seen in this. We can talk about that more if that's one of the things you want to talk about. Finding 4. We've heard some examples of this hinted at in our presentations, especially our last one on Arizona. For even in the high-performing organizations, what we found is even when they're doing a medium or a large project, they pull people from the front line into those projects. They include them as part of those project teams. Why do you think they do that? This guy can't know anything. This gal can't know anything. She's from the front lines. She doesn't have a master's degree like the rest of us. What does she have? Yeah. She knows what actually works and what actually doesn't. It was hilarious. We were in one situation where the issue being talked about was, well, if we're going to do this, the frontline manager, the frontline supervisor has to give their people time. We also heard about time and a little bit of resources. And one of the bright techs, Harvard MBA, said, oh, that's not going to be a problem. That's not going to be a problem. Frontline gal, woman, raised her hand and says, that's a major problem. We'll never get released for that. I had to fight to get, I had to actually take leave, one of my free days, just to be here for this meeting. Okay, now, how many problems downstream did that solve that would have happened if they'd launched it without that frontline person there? Frontline people can give you some insight. They can make you look good. They can help you make your solutions implementable. But there's another thing that happens. Remember, we also have this layer of improvement at the bottom. Once it's launched, you've got ambassadors to their colleagues on the front lines. That, hey, this is going to work. If it doesn't work, we can fix it. So essentially, it makes implementation, it raises your success rate, and it makes implementation a lot easier. Okay, let's move on a little bit from there. What's required to make CI work at the top level? This is just a high point of what I would say is a whole section in our book, section 2 in our book, looking at it from the top. First of all, visible, regular support from the top. Okay? You got to have that leadership from the top if you're going to try to do it across the whole unit. We're going to go two different ways here. We're going to go across the whole unit, and then we're going to go within the frontline unit. And this is across the whole unit. This is section 2 of the book. Secondly, a highly capable champion and a small support team. Okay? Highly capable champion. We're talking about some of the people in this room are those champions. And you're looking at me and say, oh God, I want a budget. I want 3 more people. What are you talking about, a small team? What happens when you have a big continuous improvement team of continuous improvement black belt professionals with advanced degrees? What happens when you got a lot of them? People think it's their work to do. They're there to make the improvements. And you know what? They're capable and they can usually find and make enough improvements to justify the office. But what don't they do? They don't get into the real work, that 80% they're missing on the ground floor. What that office should be doing is leveraging themselves and driving the expertise down in the organization. Not solving problems themselves. Maybe on a few big problems they could facilitate, but even if they're facilitating a problem, they shouldn't be leading it. That should be led by an executive champion if it's that important. So small teams are actually important. We've seen companies or government organizations that have run in trouble because they've had too big a team, too much support. Strong frontline focus. Got to have that frontline focus. That's where 80% of the action is. Not only that, the interesting thing is that we found a strong synergy if you got the culture, because at the front line, that's where you build your culture. And where do you get a culture? Do you get a culture by preaching at it? Do you believe your way into behaving, or do you behave your way into believing? We like to think that most people behave their way into believing. Oh, this isn't going to work. You go out, hey, they listened to me. Imagine that. They took my idea and look, it's working. I'll give them another one. But it changes the culture from the bottom up. Frontline focus. CI infrastructure, we talk about that. That's the training, that's the systems, that's the getting rid of some maybe policies and practices, that's training your supervisors. The supervisors are the critical component here. The irony in that is, Alan and I, my co-author, did a study, sort of one of these side studies, of what is needed in a supervisor to run a good idea-driven unit. 90% is what any good supervisor should do. So it really is just supervisory training with a couple of added things. Things like, how do you handle a bad idea? Yeah, that's one of the things. There's no such thing as a bad idea, right? Wrong. They're terrible ideas. They're ideas that are illegal, dangerous, won't work, unethical. There are terrible ideas out there. So you're a frontline supervisor, you don't want to step on the guy's toes. How do you respond when they come up with an absolutely terrible frontline idea? What do you say? That's a terrible idea. Is that what you say? Do you say, oh, that's a great idea? That's not what you say. That's being disingenuous. Here's what you do, for example. You say, hey, that's interesting. How'd you come up with that idea? How do you think they came up with the idea? They saw a problem that they want to solve. All right? So you say, hey, that's astute. That's a good problem. Now, the problem is that won't work because we got a law against it or this or that or the other thing. But what can we do? What can we do to solve that problem? I'd like you to keep working on that because that's a real problem that I didn't even notice. So there's ways to handle frontline ideas that are bad. That's part of that training and infrastructure. Last thing I want to mention is how you launch one of these things. How you launch one of these things. Do you have a measured launch or a shotgun launch? A shotgun rollout. You know what a shotgun rollout is, right? Everywhere, same time. bang, we're going to put in the Florida management system, and we all start on Tuesday. And it's going to be great. What happens? Well, here's the problem. You're setting it up for failure. Because maybe 20% of the managers really buy into this. The front line, the managers that are involved buy into this. 80% don't. So what you hear is this cacophony of, we don't have the time, it doesn't work, or worse yet, what do we get? Continuous appearance instead of continuous improvement. You know, they put up the boards, they put up this, they do that, they give the training, and then they don't do anything with it. Waste of time, waste of effort, but more than that, everyone now in that unit doesn't believe in continuous improvement because they know it's a waste of time, a waste of effort, it doesn't go anywhere. So, what we like to do is we like a much more measured rollout and focus on a coalition of the willing. Brian Elms from Peak Academy first gave us that language. I've heard it a lot in other places since. But a coalition of the willing. In other words, you take the people that are interested in pursuing this, you give them the resources, you give them the support. Remember, how big an office do we have? Tiny. How many resources do we have? Limited. So we focus on making them successful. And what do we have coming out of that? We have a center of excellence within the broader organization. We have that corner of government more effective. Okay? Versus trying to get caught up chasing our tails with doing it broadly. Now, I have seen some broad launches that have been heavily funded, that have worked satisfactorily, that have worked pretty well even. But for most of us, I would suggest a focused approach, a measured focused approach was what we saw being most effective. Okay, I didn't get that changed. This is my slide that I screwed up on. Ignore the period. Culture. We talked about culture. It's one of the topics we have here. How do you create a culture? Here again, we're a big believer in you create a culture by doing and not by preaching. You know, it's the behave your way into believing instead of believe your way into behaving. So what we found is the culture basically is make improvement part of everyone's regular job. We heard this at the Arizona Management System when they talked about the management versus working on the AMS, and the more mature ones sort of merged, is what I heard, because that's the way it should be. It's part of everyone's job. Design continuous improvement into work regimes. So you start out every day with a huddle, around a huddle board, and say, what kind of problems did we run into? Or we all agreed we were going to work on this problem. Oh, by the way, and when you're starting a system, what kind of problems do you pick to start with? You take something that aligns with our mission up on top, that's coming down from the top? Of course not. What you do is you pick things that are important to the people involved. You work on those problems. You don't necessarily go for big solutions. You go for little solutions that nibble to death a big problem. Okay. Hold people accountable. How do you hold people accountable? It's hard ways, soft ways. Metrics. Love metrics. Love metrics. You got to know what you're doing. You got to have a metric. You got to have a direction. You're holding them together and say, what are you doing to achieve that? You might even put it in the annual review, the annual performance review. The other thing is just a daily huddle. You know, you're going around and say, George, we haven't heard from you on this one. That's a soft way of holding them accountable. Half the time you'll get yeah. But every once in a while you'll get I was thinking about this, and they just didn't want to voice it. One of the biggest problems we have, we heard government has these long-time employees in the ranks, right? Doing the same job for 40 years. 40 years ago, when they came to the job, do you think they said, I'm going to just sit, keep my head down, and do the job as they designed it for the next 40 years? Do you think that's what they said? They're probably excited to contribute, to change, to improve things, but they keep getting told, don't think, just do. Do your job. Or, worse yet, if you have an idea, if you have something, it's seen as a complaint. So the people with ideas are seen as complainers. So what we have is we have a concept called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness originally came out of Stanford and dogs, but we won't get into there, and electric shocks. Research that could not be conducted today because it couldn't pass the standards, but we won't go there. But human beings learn they're helpless, and now we've got to unlearn those people. Not always easy, takes time, takes understanding them, takes getting a relationship with them, takes trust building. Ongoing skills development, provide the time and resources. Now, what do you do when somebody says we don't have the time? I'll tell you our favorite trick. Our favorite trick is I say, okay, for the first month of this frontline program, we want you guys to come up with ideas to save time. What are we doing that we shouldn't do anymore? What can we streamline? And what can we automate? Come up with ideas. We have never failed to come up with about 5 times more time that first month than running the system actually takes. We've never failed in doing that. So time, money, resources, we're not talking about a lot of resources. We're talking about chump change in the scheme of things. The biggest frontline, most expensive frontline idea we got from, that came up in Denver Excise and Licensing was they had a central scanner, printer, copier. 17 windows. Everyone queued up every time they needed to photocopy and scan in a document, a driver's license, something like that. They were queued up. The people waiting are sitting there, and there's these people talking around the copier. How do you think the customer feels? So someone came up with an idea. I says, hey, we should have scanner, printer, copiers at each desk. What does a scanner, printer, copier cost today? It probably got them for $100 a piece or less. Stacy could find that in her budget somewhere. So what we're talking about when we're talking about resources, we're talking about just enough to grease the wheels. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. Okay, one last thing I want to get into. All right, what if you don't have the support of your boss? What do you do if you don't have the support of your boss? Remember, where's the action? Front lines. You're a frontline supervisor or you're dealing with a frontline supervisor. What do? You go guerrilla. You can go guerrilla and focus on your little corner of government, your little department. And if you're in a position like you guys are, you can support that without a whole lot of effort. First thing you do, this gets into a theme, you develop a shared local vision and measurable goals. That's the first thing you do. What do I mean by a shared local vision? Okay, where does vision come from? When we think of vision, what do we usually think of? Stuff up here, right? Is that meaningful down here? Sometimes, some points not. What we need is a local vision that aligns with this vision, but is created by the people there. How do you get a shared vision? By having them create the vision. We already heard that. Now, that vision might be, for example, in the case of the Department of Excise and Licensing, it might be eliminate the line. When you achieve it, you move on. You create a new one. So I'm using vision rather loosely, but I don't want to use the term goal because it's more than just a goal. Okay? So you start with a frontline vision. You set up simple systems to capture and execute improvement ideas. You could do it on a flip chart. I've seen it done on a flip chart. You can do it in a regular huddle board, very formally. Keep it simple. Make it fast. Make it easy. There's no science, no huge science in this. But make sure you follow through. Make sure you track it. Make sure you have a date by which everything's due. All the standard stuff you've learned is good because it's necessary, but you can do that at the frontline level. You develop your team's problem-solving skills. Okay, training. Training, we've seen things. What goes into frontline training? What we found is there's 3 things that need to be included, and then a fourth characteristic. The three things are a process focus. You got to focus on a process because you can improve an operation and not improve the process or create problems downstream. Second thing, you guys have covered a lot of this. Second thing is problem identification. Things like root cause analysis. One of the other things we teach along with that are idea activators that get people to look at a problem from a different perspective, that all of a sudden you see something that was not a problem up until now to be a problem. Identifying problems, not symptoms. That's the big thing. We oftentimes attack symptoms, especially if we attack things from the top. We focus on symptoms because they don't know the deeper workings. And lastly, problem solving. So process focus, problem identification, problem solving. And that basically covers 90% of what you need to know for the frontline level. And then the third thing is implementation. Implementation. This is done in one of two ways. It's either done as part of the training, For example, one of our favorite stories that we put in the book is the Washington State Patrol garage. They were having problems in the state's wisdom. They ran into some budget problems, so they stopped capital investment, including police cars. So for a couple of years, they didn't buy police cars. All right, now, crisis is over. They bought police cars. Does that mean the garage can convert all those police cars at a faster rate? They were sized for replacement. So they had 3 years of cars out in the lot. This is Pacific Coast, North Pacific Coast. They had moss on the cars. They're bringing in cars with moss to be converted to police cars. All right, training from Boeing on lean. They came out of a week's training with 67 action items that they could implement immediately. Developed in training while they were teaching the techniques by the people on the front lines. All right, by the way, the story of that is they went from 12 to 36 in 3 years. They wiped out the backlog. Then they started on the conversions. They had 5 years of conversions to do. You take a police car, a retired police car with high mileage, sitting in the yard for 5 years. What's it worth then? But before you can get rid of it, you have to decommission it. So they got the decommissioning. That gave them more ideas on how to improve it. They got it so efficient that they even started pulling in work from outside. Great story, great story. But develop your team into good problem solvers. And lastly, make improvement part of everyone's job. It's just every day, all the time. And you do that, frontline supervisor, guy comes to you with a problem, you're the frontline supervisor, you got to train him to do what? Most people, supervisor, supposed to know, come to you with a problem, question, you answer it, right? What do you want to do? What do you think? What do you think? Ask it back. Don't take that responsibility, because if you answer it, then this frontline person thinks that's the way you're supposed to behave. You got any problem, you ask the boss tells you how you're supposed to do it. There's how many different right ways to most problems, solutions? Anyways, it gets back to that frontline supervisor. I'm going to stop there. I haven't been keeping track of my time. I think I went a little slower than I had planned. Boy, did I. Boy, did I. I got too excited. I apologize. I think we can take a couple of questions, though. What, you guys have any really tough questions? I shortcut you guys on time. I'm sorry. I get involved with my stories and they drag.
I was just wondering, what are some of your biggest surprises as you went through the study?
One of the biggest surprises, well, the biggest single surprise was we expected, because of government, you had to show results fast. So we thought something like rapid improvement events or something like that would be the way to go. And we found that not the way to go, the way not to go. And so really what we found is we were surprised. We've always been champions of frontline folks, but this really drove it home because we thought government was different, but it was different in a way that you had to show the results so that you could justify the program when the new regime came in. You slide in underneath, you stay out of the way. That was our biggest single finding. Anything else?
Did you run into any problems with misallocation of results? You had efforts at the frontline level that weren't, didn't have metrics assigned to them, and had a mid-level process going on at the same time?
In the lower performing units, yes. Not in the high performing units, because that shuts it down real fast. And so,
Low-performing units that have the most benefit accrued.
yeah, everyone's, you have the least benefits occurring, and you got everyone trying to take credit for it. And what do you want? You don't. It doesn't matter who takes credit for it. The other thing is somebody comes up with the idea, another person refines it, the manager allows it to happen, his boss allows the manager the freedom to do that. Who's the hero? The answer is, everyone. But the point is, as soon as you try to start, yeah, we ran into those problems, and those were usually the very short-lived programs. They're dangerous. You identified a problem. Anything else?
In my mind, the front line to be able to do problem solving, I agree with you, is critical. How big of an impact did you see with the chief executive having buy-in and the success of a program?
How important was if we're talking about the frontline level, how important was the chief executive's buy-in? And the answer is, it depends, but it's very important. And I'll tell you why. The high performers that had a broad base of activity had that chief executive championing it. No uncertain terms. Mayor Hancock went through black belt training himself. Mayor Hancock showed up at every graduation class of training. Mayor Hancock showed up, talked to all of the different booths at the Innovation Fair and watched what the frontline people were doing. There was no question Mayor Hancock had support. The net result of that, it's one of the most broadly based continuous improvement programs in government because of that. So the people at the top, absolutely vital. In our friends in New Brunswick, what I didn't tell you is New Brunswick had just gone through a 7.5% across the board cut because they were having financial problems. They were due to have that a second year. When Jane came across and was reporting, she ran the liquor license, the provincial liquor distributor, which are provincial owned in Canada. And it had just been named one of the 100 best places to work in Canada, and it had these improvement stuff. And Higgs, the finance minister, said, "What'd you do?" And she explained, Lean Six Sigma. This is what we're doing. This is all the thing. We use balanced scorecard to put accountability into it and all this sort of stuff. He says, "Can that work across the government? We need to find a solution." And she says, "No, I don't think so." I couldn't write that in the book. She took it out. So just don't tell her that I told you that. But she says, so in the book, it was difficult. Or it would be difficult. But the point is, she presented to all the deputy ministers who are the department heads. They're looking at another 7.5% cut. Do you think they're for this? She had a problem in her rollout, as a matter of fact, because too many departments wanted to sign on, even though she required each department to have an executive champion in the leadership team that was to champion this, plus at least 2 black belts to run that department's unit. Okay? So that top support is critical. However, if you don't have that, you focus on creating pockets of excellence. Now, here's the other thing. You create a pocket of excellence, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to the people in that department? What's going to happen to those people in the department?
Are you talking about the domino effect?
Somewhat, but what it is they have now worked with an organization that works. What about that manager? What about those managers? What about those people when they become managers? They know what can be done. And they know how to bootleg it because they've seen it. And so all of a sudden, that's a way to take Gorilla and grow it. And that doesn't get changed. That doesn't get changed unless the people leave, but that doesn't get changed with the next regime and the next shiny thing the government officials are focusing on, the top level officials. Hey, thank you much. Just one comment. You have any questions? Just email me, pick up my card, email me. I'll answer any questions you want. You want to start a dialogue on a problem? That's not. My goal is to get this stuff out there. Of course, to sell books so that I can afford to get this stuff out there. But I talked my publicist into creating a super secret website. They've got their regular website. You go to buy a book from BK. You can't get to this web page. But if you have this website, which I have cards with QR codes on, you get a 30% discount off of print, off of digital, and off of audio. So if you're interested in a deal, I talked them into 30% off. Why? Because they don't have to pay Audible now. They don't have to pay the discount. They actually make more directly. So it's going to be an interesting experiment. If I can move enough books this way, they might do it for other books. Hey, thank you very much. I'm going to be around till tomorrow afternoon. Probably leave out of here about 11:30 or so. So if you have any questions or you want to talk to me, I'll be around. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I went over.